Hi everyone. We're from Positive Futures, which is a charity in Lancaster which supports people with their mental health. Although we're from one specific charity, please do see what's available to you in your local area, because I can guarantee there will be support services in every town or city. So just to introduce myself briefly, my name's Melissa. I work obviously for Positive Futures. I also have a condition called Alström syndrome, which is where you're born without a certain protein. And one of the effects of this is that I'm completely blind. I'm going to hand over to my colleague now to briefly introduce herself.
So, hi, I'm Jess, and I'm a student social worker currently on placement at Positive Futures. I was also born with a condition called ocular albinism nystagmus, so I'm also visually impaired.
And I'm Libby. I'm also a student social worker at Positive Futures on placement.
Lovely. So you'll be hearing from us throughout our selection of short videos. Today, me and Jess are going to talk about how our visual impairment has played a part maybe in our mental health, or how our mental health has played a part in our visual impairment. So we've prepared some questions to ask each other. We hope you find these tips and these answers useful. So if you'd like to kick us off, Jess.
Okay, so just to begin, what is the most challenging part about your disability?
I think for me, the most challenging part is being what I want to do sometimes is stopped by my visual impairment. So I have to maybe think about how I want to do things, and sometimes I can't do things easily. They take a bit more planning, and I find that really frustrating. But for me, I've done quite a lot of work on accepting my visual impairment, and I do think that sometimes you do have to accept that it's a part of you. So for a long time, I really struggled with that part of my identity of being a blind woman. I really struggled with that. And that really held me back because I wouldn't ask for help. I spent a long time, when I was losing my sight, I spent a long time pretending I could see, because I didn't want to own the fact that my sight was going. And I think for me, once I kind of embraced blindness, then that was a really big step in the right direction. But now the most difficult thing is when I want to do something, and I'll say to people so many times, I just want half an eye. I don't even need a full eye. I just like half an eye, and I could do this so much quicker. Like I was trying to make a cheese sauce the other day, and I was like, I can't measure this blooming milk. My talking jug wasn't working. And I was like, if I just had an eye, I could do this.
Yeah.
But never mind. It got done, but it just sometimes takes things a bit longer. What about you, Jess?
So really similar for me. So obviously I still have a lot of sight, but there are things that I can't do. So day to day, the hardest part is just not having complete independence all the time. So like some days I'll have a day where it comes up multiple times where there's a lot of things I can't do. So I won't be able to do something or get somewhere because I can't drive, and I'll struggle the whole way through a lecture because I couldn't sit at the front and the lecturer hasn't put up a PowerPoint that I can access. So for the whole hour I'm struggling. And days like that get really, really frustrating. And that can make me feel a bit low, but they aren't all the time. And yeah, sometimes you just have to kind of get creative and adapt. But sometimes it's just like, I wish I could do this just the simple way. I wish things were just a bit easier and I could be completely independent.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think sometimes, I think as well that the things that slow us down is having to ask someone for help and getting someone to do it in the way you'd like. Because people say I'm really bossy and a bit perfectionist, but I'm like, well, if you just did it how I wanted you to do it, I wouldn't have to say all these things and look so bossy. But
it's hard because you have to be assertive sometimes, and that can kind of take you, depending on how you are personally, that can take a while to develop that kind of confidence to say something, and to be really clear about what you need and what support you need in place. That can be really challenging.
Definitely, I definitely think it can be. And I think managing gratitude, because I find that I have to be grateful all the time. You know, like when someone helps you out, you're like, oh, thank you, that's brilliant. And I'm not saying that I don't feel that, because I do feel that, but sometimes it does just feel a bit tiring and
exhausting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what's your next question, Jess?
So next question is, what was the most challenging part about growing up with a disability?
I think for me, it was realizing I was different. Like, I have at certain times in my life really realized that I was different. So I think I was maybe about 9, and I don't know if anything had led on to it, because I can't remember the build up, but I just remember sitting in my room and thinking, like, I'm not like the other children. I'm really set apart from them. And then I think a sort of an issue was how the teachers kind of impacted on that. Like, I had a best friend at school, and we, you know, like, you actually do, now I look back at it, like children do, we just play together all the time. But the teachers thought that wasn't good developmentally for my friend, so they brought her parents into school and they told them she had to play with other people, and we were just split up. And so we're like a month apart as well in age, so I've literally done everything with her. Like, we even went to the toilet together. We did everything together, and then one day we just weren't allowed. You know, one day it was like, oh, Lydia, go and play with so and so, and nobody explained that to us. And I didn't make other friends at that point. I just played on my own. And the teacher was like, oh, do you mind playing on your own? I was like, no, it's fine. So and we didn't till years late, till we were like adults, and I kind of harbored like quite a lot of anger to her for ditching me. And it wasn't until we were sort of like in our 20s where I was like, why did you just stop hanging out with me? And I actually found out that she'd just been told to stop. I'd never known that. And then I think when I started losing my sight when I was like 15, 16, because I was always partially sighted, but then it started deteriorating. I think then I really struggled to like hang out with my friends in sort of a classic teenage way. I really struggled like navigating round. And I remember one of my friends, I used to link arms with people, and one of my friends said, like, if you need a walking aid, then get a wheelchair. And so I was like, I'm just going to stop hanging out with you. Like, it's too hard for me to like go out at lunchtime and navigate. So I'd either kind of hang out with people that didn't mind linking with, or I'd like not go out, kind of thing. And I do owe a lot to my brother, because when I really like struggled getting home from school, he would ditch his friends and walk home with me. So I'm lucky that I've always been really close to both my brothers, and they've always really looked out for me. But I kind of tried to verbalize to my friends, like, I can't see the sun. I'm photophobic as well, so the sun would be like too bright, and I'd say, I can't see where I'm walking, it's too bright for me. And they'd like guide me for a bit, and then they'd obviously want to go off and do their like 16-year-old thing. And then I kind of really isolated myself. And I was, again, when I was a teenager, I was really conscious that I was different. So I tried to make my difference something else. So when I was a teenager, I was really gothic, and I wanted to be like, that was my point of difference, rather than my visual impairment was the point of difference. So like, I'm naturally blonde, but you know, I like dyed my hair purple and did all the makeup and stuff. And I really deliberately did that, because I knew I was different anyway, but I wanted to be like known for being the goth rather than known for being the blind, kind of thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Jess?
So really, really similar to you as well. Like, school and education growing up was really hard, and it was just always feeling different. And I think when you're in school and you're growing up and you're like making friends and stuff, for your self-esteem, the one thing you don't want to be is different to anyone else. So I know I think it's a bit different now, but when I was in primary school, I was the only one in my year with glasses. There wasn't much selection, so they were always like a ridiculously bright colour, really round lenses. Like, it was very, very obvious. It was always a visual reminder that I was a bit different. And I got offered equipment to help me out in school, so iPads and, you know, just like magnifiers, that type of thing. And I would never accept it because I didn't want to look any different or have anything different. I didn't want to need it and be different to anyone else. So yeah, that was really difficult. I also, like, in lessons, I have nystagmus, so my eyes involuntarily move back and forth. And in lessons to see, sometimes it helps with the wobble if I was like, if I tilted my head horizontally. So I'd have my head really obviously like cocked to one side. So it was just always like, I always did like weird little things to adapt, and it did make me look different, and that's the last thing I wanted. So yeah, that was a really hard thing about growing up with it. But yeah.
Do you have any like positives of growing up with it?
Yeah, I do. I think that it kind of, it made me more kind of creative because I had to work around it. So I'd find little ways to do things like you know, I'd quickly take photos with my phone of like the whiteboard and stuff like that, or I'd always just find like creative little ways around things. So I think it made me more resourceful. So that's good. What about you? Do you have anything positive from growing up with it?
I honestly, I think for me, it's really been a journey. And now I wish I'd kind of been like, when I was a really young child, I was just really like confident, and I didn't really care what people thought. But then I guess life kind of gets in the way, and it teaches you sometimes that you should care, which I think is probably wrong. And I'm kind of more, sorry, I'm kind of more back to how I used to be now, where I am very confident about, so like I feel very comfortable in my own skin now. And I agree with you, Jess. I think it's probably you like a bit of a problem solver. You think of like those creative ways to do things, and yeah, no, I think that, and I think for me, like a big positive, maybe not necessarily for me, but I certainly think for my siblings, I think they both like I know you never know what they'd be like if they didn't have a disabled sibling, but my brothers are both kind, compassionate people that will do anything to like help someone else, you know, someone in need. They will do that, and they wouldn't judge somebody at face value, because they know that like I'm not just blind, I've got so many different parts to me. So I think it's been like a real positive for us all.
Yeah, I think as well, I agree with you. Like, I've heard people tell me, don't let it define you and don't let it become you know, part of your personality, but it does, like, it is part of your identity. Like, I don't let it completely define me, but it is part of who I am, and it has, you know, made me who I am today. So I think it's really good to kind of learn to accept that it will kind of define a little bit of your identity.
No, I agree with that. And I think to be like, I'm more than blindness, well, yeah, of course you are. Or, you know, like visual impairment, of course you are. You are so many other things, but sometimes your blindness does sort of impact on the kind of person you are. Like, I can't judge someone at face value, because there is no face value. So
yeah, you don't have that.
Yeah, so I have, although to be fair, I do have like a voiceometer, and if I'm not keen on the voice, then I'm like so I do probably have different ways, but you know, I maybe would get to know somebody, you know, when they're like, oh, it's personality that matters, like, well, it is, because that's what I have to home in on, kind of thing. It's interesting though. What's our next question, Jess?
So our next question is, how do you feel your disability has impacted your mental health?
I think for me, they probably. Oh, minute, I'm just moving. There we go. I think for me, they probably have gone hand in hand. Like, I've struggled with my self-esteem. I've struggled with self-harm. I've struggled with not a full-on eating disorder, but I certainly have struggled. Me and food have a constant, interesting relationship. I've done a lot of, and to be fair, I don't know how many things that I've done were directly linked to my disability. Like, I know self-harm was, I was feeling a lot of feelings. I don't know at the time how to talk about my feelings. So for me, it was like a tension release. It wasn't, it was very superficial self-harm, but I needed that to unburden myself in a way. And it wasn't actually until I got some therapy for the self-harm, and it wasn't until then that we actually talked about sight loss as a grieving process, and they were saying it's just like losing someone, so treat it like you're actually grieving a person. And once I went through that grief process, and I kind of thought like these, you know, I had like a favorite photo, like little sights that I absolutely love, you know, like the lights on the tree or fireworks and stuff like that. I have like those visual memories, and it was about like acknowledging how important they were to me, but actually saying like goodbye to those memories almost, and working out how to do things in a blind way. So like bonfire night, I used to really enjoy, but then I kind of turned into a bit of a demon. I used to hate them, and everyone else to hate them as well. But because it was such a visual experience. But then it's about kind of, oh, what's different? What other senses come into play at bonfire nights? And like, I don't know if I would have had those same struggles if I wasn't disabled, because for me, there's always been a really big pull into like trying to be the norm versus the person I actually am, which does not really fit the norm at all. I always like I still worry now, to be fair, like, oh, you know, like I know that I'm not, I say normal in inverted commas because I don't think normal exists, but I know that I'm not a normal person. And sometimes I'm like, oh, is that wrong? So I still have like those inner monologues with myself, but I do think as well with a visual impairment there are going to be a lot more situations that cause you anxiety. Like for me, going to a new place or even meeting a friend is such an anxiety provoking situation. So for me, like learning some anxiety coping strategies so that I can use them in town. And I had an incident before lockdown where I was sort of waiting for a friend. They were very, very late, so that is a horribly scary situation for me, because I've got like my visual anxiety, you know, like that around my visual impairment. But in the past I've also had stalkers who've used my visual impairment to their gain. So I have like a lot of triggers around being on my own, but some of the techniques I've learned have really helped me. And you learn every day, don't you? Like, we're on a constant journey, so I'm still learning. Like every bad experience, I always say like a mistake is a lesson, not a mistake. So there's still things that I'm still very anxious, like socially. You have things where it's like eating, which is nice, is stressful because you're like, am I eating the same as everyone else? Do you know what I mean? You have all those questions, like, am I eating the same? Am I eating messily? Am I being a pit? For me anyway, because I have such a dysfunctional relationship with food, I have like all of those questions as well. So I think it's really interesting. How about you, Jess?
Just a heads up, just tilt the camera up a little bit just so we can see your lovely face. I don't want to interrupt you because you're doing great.
Is that better?
That's perfect. So I just want to say as well, I think your description of self-harm is so useful, because I think it can be really hard to understand when someone just says self-harm, but the way you've said, you know, it was like a release of kind of the emotional pain you were going through. I think that's a really good way to kind of help people understand it a bit. And I wouldn't say that it's had too much of an impact on my mental health, but I do think on days where it's really frustrating, that does get me feeling a bit low. And I do struggle with my self-esteem just from that, always feeling a little bit different. So I sometimes worry that I don't fit in. And that can kind of get to me at sometimes. And as well, you were just saying about there's going to be situations where you naturally feel a bit more anxious. When I started university, you have Freshers Week where, you know, ideally you go out every night of the week. And I went out once because I was so terrified of being left on my own, because I didn't really know people. I didn't want to say, oh, I'm the visually impaired person that you need to look after all night, because I just didn't want to be left in the dark by myself, because my vision in the dark is really a lot worse. So it took me a long time to build up the confidence to just say on a night out, you know, like, are you okay to help me down these stairs? Or just, you know, I'm not that great with my eyesight. And it was absolutely fine. And there were people there, and, you know, you're always around a lot of people. But at first there was so much anxiety that came along with that. So it was harder to kind of socialise at uni at the beginning, and it took some time. It took me a bit longer than it took everyone else, but that can be difficult.
Definitely. Like I don't think I had a uni night out when I was doing my undergrad. Like, but I was kind of, I don't know if lucky is the word, but I had my ex at the time, so we were our own little bubble, and it was really convenient for me because I didn't have to stretch socially because we were just a pair. And then we split up when I was in the first year of my masters, and I was suddenly then like, what do I do? Like I find it really difficult to kind of, at uni especially, I found it really difficult because you've got a support work. With me, I had a support worker with me. So we'd sort of sit together and chat. So people don't gravitate towards you, and it's really hard to know some of those social cues of like who's smiling at you, like who is available to sit next to. And I think I really missed out on my university experience because I wasn't confident. Whereas I kind of was. I'd done had a lot of different therapy before I did my masters, so I was a lot more confident. And you know, I come from my masters with, I guess, friends, but I don't know, like people who would call themselves my friends. So I think a lot of confidence. And I think obviously, just to sum up, like me and Jess are talking about maybe some adverse experiences, but my life certainly has not all been doom and gloom. I've done a lot of positive things, and 9 times out of 10 my life is really happy. So we don't want you to think like visual impairment is just a slippery slope to depression.
And all the time there's challenges, but it's not all the time, and most of the time it's okay.
Exactly. Lovely. What's our next question, Jess?
So your next one is, did you seek support for how your disability impacted your mental health, and if so, what support?
So like I said, I've had a lot of different types of counselling. There's just sort of standard counselling, which is kind of just talking through person-centered therapy. I've had, it's called Human Givens, which is like a solution-based therapy, which gelled quite well with me because I'm quite a solution-based person. And I've also there's a workbook called Thrive by Robert Kelly that addresses it. It sort of says that we have these negative building blocks in our minds, and it's really important that we deconstruct those building blocks. So it basically shows you how to do that, and you can either have that as well as like alongside a Thrive practitioner, which I did, and that came at a really good time and really helped me shape my thinking. And as well, I guess when I was a child, I used the local charity, sight loss charity, for a bit of social interaction. But I don't think I've ever sought help for mental health, but then I had like a few years of therapy. So I have had that, and that's really helped me. I didn't necessarily have a counsellor who specialised in disability, although there are counsellors for that out there. But I had, like I said, with the grief, that was a really good way of looking at it. So I don't think you need a disabled specific counsellor, but actually addressing it was really important for me. How about you, Jess?
So again, I didn't really seek specific support for my disability, and I never had counselling by someone that specialises in disability or sight loss or visual impairment or anything like that. But I did have some counselling here and there at some points throughout school. It was with the same woman actually all throughout my high school experience. I used to really struggle in PE. It sounds so kind of ridiculous, but I used to really struggle in PE because I couldn't see if we did anything that involved like a small ball like badminton or hockey. I couldn't see anything, and what I would do is I'd go ask to get a drink, and I would sit in the toilets for that hour and not do anything, or I'd get upset. So eventually I stopped doing that because it just wasn't good for me, and she would kind of help me like kind of accept that like sports was just not going to be my thing, and that's not a way that I was going to be able to socialize, or it just wasn't for me. That was fine. So she kind of helped me through that, and just kind of that social exclusion and self-esteem and confidence building, because I think when you're constantly reminded that you can't do something, or not everyone's really nice about your visual impairment all the time, especially in school and especially in a lesson like PE. So it can really knock your confidence and affect your self-esteem. So it was building that back up, and I was able to do that with just general counselling at different points throughout high school. So that really helped.
That's so interesting you said about PE, because I used to skip my PE classes, and I used to tell them that I had guitar lessons, which I actually didn't. It was an intricate web of lies that did eventually get infiltrated, and I did get into a lot of trouble. So definitely that wasn't a how to get out of it tip. But what I think, had I maybe been a bit more self-aware, would have maybe said, I'm really struggling. And it was kind of because I didn't want to be, look, I think we were doing aerobics and you have to follow like the routine, and I just knew it wasn't going to happen. So I was like, it would just take me out of that equation and we won't worry about it. So I do definitely think, and listening to what you've said as well, Jess, it's about having that kind of place to talk about your feelings and emotions, and even if they're not happy, then you need that space and to kind of build that self-awareness about what you are and aren't comfortable with, and then you can kind of convey that, can't you, to people you're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it doesn't have to be specifically for disability or around sight loss or visual impairment. I think sometimes, like you said, it's just having the space to talk about things and feelings that come with the challenges of sight loss. And, you know, everyone kind of goes through different challenges that cause them to have feelings that aren't so nice. So, you know, no matter what, it's always just good to have a space to talk about them.
Definitely. Lovely. What's our next question?
So our final question, we kind of already touched on it a bit, is do you feel that your disability has had a positive impact on your mental health?
Now I think that it has. I think if you'd have asked me like maybe even a year ago, I'd have been like, I don't think so. I think it has really shaped me. It has made me take a really in-depth look at myself and identify all my positives. It has helped me identify some of my negatives as well, because we're not all just made up of positivity. It's really important for me anyway to acknowledge the other side of my personality and character, and it's made me have a really in-depth look at me and, you know, what's to do with my visual impairment. So maybe some of my anxieties are and it's kind of, now it's got me to talk about those feelings, whether it's with family or whether I need to go to a different organisation to talk about those feelings, you know, to find assistance for those issues. It's taught me to have like a really in-depth look and be really honest, because, and something that I say to like both parents and children, like if you're not honest with yourself, then you will be unhappy, because you know that you're not living how you want to. And once you are honest with yourself, even if it's about something you can't do, once you say like, I can't do it. For me, like reading, I suddenly stopped being able to read, and it was like, oh my god, I think I pretended to read for about half a year, which was interesting. But like once I admitted that I couldn't and I needed to make a shift onto audio or whatever, then actually life really improved, because I was still doing something I loved, which was reading, but in a different way. So I think it's so important to be honest. I think you have to be honest with yourself first, and then once you are, you can then be honest with people around you, and that creates positive well-being and helps you live the best life that you can. How about you, Jess?
So again, similar. It kind of forces you to be your own advocate, because sometimes you do have to speak up and say, hey, I can't do this, or this isn't working for me. So it has given me a lot of confidence, and kind of it's made me more resilient as well. But yeah, I think that honesty is so important, and just being able to speak up when something isn't quite working for you, so that you actually get support, that does make life a lot easier. And yeah, it does kind of add a layer of difficulty to some like everyday tasks that, you know, normally should be really easy. But yeah, it's forced me to kind of be creative, adapt, and be able to tell people like, hey, this isn't, you know, working for me this way, can we try it this way? So it has confidence in a way, even though it has affected my self-esteem, it's also given me some confidence in other areas.
Lovely, that's fabulous, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing everything, Jess. So I think just to finish what we're saying, I think, you know, if you're a parent, have a conversation with your child, check in, how are they feeling, and work with those feelings. If you're a child or a young person listening to this, I think we would probably both sum up by saying, speak out. You know, it's okay to feel however you're feeling, and it's certainly okay not to feel okay all of the time. So just have that conversation. Once you tell one person, you know, things can start to change then. So don't keep things to yourself, don't bottle things up. But that concludes mine and Jess's chat. So I hope you found that useful.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening to us both.